Counting the.
Cost of being a U.S. history teacher.
Oh wow, Peter. So when did you first think about becoming a history teacher?
I often joke that teaching calls you, you don't pursue it, it just grabs you. Because when you first, um, I don't think very many, there are special cases where people say, I want to be a teacher. But I think in most cases, you don't, it's not the foremost profession in one's mind. And for me, um, it went through a painful experience. I had a bitter disappointment where my original pursuit was law. I wanted to go to law school, and I actually made it. I went to law school at um, at a law school called Pepperdine University here in Southern California, and I'm really studied hard through my undergraduate years. Got the GPA that I needed, and you know, Korean parents are like so proud and they were bragging and kind of embarrassed and pressure is on. And as soon as I started law school, my brain shut down. It just felt like I just didn't like it. There were classes like contracts and property, which really I hated it. It was just not me, and it was a situation where very toxic, where the competition is so tough that I was losing myself. And I graduated with a degree in history. I enjoyed history and studying history. And I remember being a TA and a tutor for history back in when I was an undergraduate in college. And my professor assigned me to help this student that was having trouble writing his essays, and I helped him, and his grades got his essay performance went up. His grades improved, and I had this feeling after I, tutored him, that's saying you're gonna be in school forever. And I was just like, I was so scared
Who
when
said that?
I just had that feeling, that
Oh, feeling.
premonition
Okay.
in the back of my head. And man, I was just like, I hope this is not the case. And what do you know? It happened.
That's
So,
very interesting because in Korea, generally speaking, working for schools is pretty well respected uh, thing to do. And then I guess in America, it's not the same, and not many people are aspires to be teachers. Is that the case in America?
yeah, my understanding in Korea is like education is like what professional sports here in America is. In America, it's all about more or less more of a sports, activities, looking good. In Korea, education is very important. So I think I can understand why people want to aspire for education. But here in America, although they say, we respect teachers and, we love teachers, and um, yeah, it has its challenges.
I
Um,
see.
the
Yeah, in
amount of
Korea.
hours you invest in it,
Mm.
and even, they say teachers have vacation, but during vacation time, we have continuing education. We still have to, some pursue higher degrees. So it's not really a vacation. It's just time off to go to more school
Oh, I see.
for many teachers. And so, yeah, it's different. I mean, I think in Korea, students are more, I guess, respectful towards their teachers. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
there's
see.
complaints, of course, in Korea too, but
Yeah,
in America, there's challenges. Although I do work in a school where the kids are fairly respectful, so I'm thankful for that.
I see. Because when I look back, when I was in elementary school, I always wanted to be a teacher, and I became a teacher. I also hated working for schools at one point. I guess you don't hate working for school, but anyway. Um, and then I began to teach privately, and I found this to be fulfilling, more free, and being able to do my things independently and everything. So in your own experience in childhood, what was your perception of teachers and your peers in general?
um, I had a close connection to my history teacher in high school. He saw something past me at that time that I did not see in myself. And so he actually saved my life in high school. He was the foremost individual that impacted my life as a teacher. And now I'm doing the same thing he does, same position. Um, I was a rebellious. I was very Americanized. I was not your typical submissive Asian student. Even in America, I was very individualistic. I was rebellious. I was a hip hopper back in the '90s, and even like one of the science teachers. I mean, it could come across as a racist comment, but one of the science teachers said to me, "How come you're not like the other Asian students? Why are you so rebellious?" And and, and so teachers were more or less. I had an adversarial relationship with many of my teachers, um, mainly because I thought I knew more than them, and but God has a way of humbling you. And my senior year in high school, I went through some painful, humbling experiences, and my history and government teacher really, really helped me. And he's been an inspiration, and I hope that I could carry on his legacy of what he did. And so I'm thankful for, I call it the Great River of Providence, where you just flow with the river, and God leads you to the person that you're meant to see, and he's one of them.
Wow. So, so you had a great teacher and then great experience later on. So, do you remember why you were rebellious or what shaped you into that kind of stage and how you changed as a student?
Oh yeah, so the rebellion stems from, I grew up, the first 4 years of my life, I was Los Angeles, California, which is predominantly, you could basically be Korean. It's like Korea 2.0. There's largest Korean community outside of Korea. Like, I think
Really?
there's, I think a million or Koreans living in Southern California. Um,
Wow.
and so, my grandmother, she didn't have to learn that much English to get by because you
Okay.
have Korean television, you have Koreatown, you have Korean signages, and so you have that familiarity um, because you had a bunch of people that looked like you. Then at the age of 4.5, we moved to another state called Oregon in a city called Portland, and all of a sudden I'm like the one of only two or three Asians and a total of five people of color total in the whole school or classroom, and I got made fun of a lot. Um, got made fun of my eyes. I was made fun. You know, soy sauce. See, they said that seaweed is gross back then, but I bet you they eat sushi now, so I got my revenge. But they made fun of tofu. They did all sorts of things. And it's because they didn't weren't familiar with Asian culture back then. So I find it very, very weird now that Korean culture is so popular because remember growing up, no one knew where Korea was. I got made fun of a lot, and that was very weird to see like American people trying to speak Korean and eating Korean food and using Korean slang and listening to Korean music. Um, and so that brought a sense of resentment towards me, sense of alienation. And you know, obviously there's, you want an outlet to tap into, and hip hop music at that time was very political back in the 90s. It, spoke about the resentment towards racism and whatnot. And that really, I really gravitated towards that. And so, you know, it's kind of weird now today. Kids are wearing baggy pants again. That's what was my uniform back then: baggy pants and a hoodie and a baseball cap. The more things change, the more things stay the same. And so I got into that. And I was in a Christian school, and my history teacher saw past that. He pulled me aside and said that you're gonna do great things in the future, in spite of my present condition. And I told him he was crazy, but yeah, it's interesting how life works out.
How do you think he saw that?
I don't know. It's just that I guess teachers can read. I mean, when you deal with people, you get to get a. You become like the CIA. You just figure out. You just have, or I don't know the Korean equivalent to the CIA, but um,
Yeah.
you just get to figure out people, right? And you just see people's potential. You see their strengths and weaknesses, and I guess he saw, I guess, boldness in me, a sense of sticking with what I believed in, and I had strong beliefs, and I stuck with it no matter what the costs and consequences at that time. And he saw that in me, and I think that he saw that I could use it in a more positive direction.
Oh wow, that's true. I think when I look at people, talk to them a little bit, I think I get a feel of what they are like and their potential and everything.
Yeah.
So, uh, so being a history teacher, what do you need to do to get there? How do you start? Did you start reading books about history? Did you always like history? Did you watch TV on history?
Oh yeah, I always loved history growing up. I was always good at that subject.
Oh wow.
I think when I was a infant or a toddler, I loved flags, like different flags. And one of the Korean words that I knew was "kuki," flag.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, that was the first one of the first Korean words that I knew. And I was fascinated with flags, and I would read about different countries and read about different histories. I always gravitated towards that. And then I really got into, like, when I was young, into like military toys and stuff like that. And military deals with a lot of history, and so you started to learn about the different wars and whatnot. And one of the television exposure that I had was the evening news. So I would always watch it, and I always learn from it. And so that got my education in history and government through that. So when I was young, I always gravitated towards that subject.
Wow. Do you have a hero that you really admire from your vast knowledge of history, and why?
Yeah, I admire Roger Williams. He's uh, a Baptist minister, or former Baptist minister, that was in the American colonial era. Um, and he really stood up for his beliefs. And he's the one that introduced religious liberty for everybody, the separation of church and state. That
Wow.
whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a pagan, whether you're an atheist, whether you be a Christian, that we have the freedom of choice to believe however we want. And so, in that time in American history, um, the common system was where the Puritans, they were like the colonial power in that region. They would force everyone to go to church. They would force everyone to their
Oh.
beliefs. And if you don't believe the way they do, they either kick you out of the colony or they would hang you. They would kill you. Roger
Wow.
Williams stood up against that and said, no, that's wrong. That's not biblical. We believe in the separation of church and state, that God is not a God of force, but God is a God of love. So Roger Williams is a big hero of mine.
Wow. So America used to act like Europe that was heavily persecuted by the government for religious reasons.
Yes, the
Initially.
ironic thing is they escape persecution, but oftentimes the victim becomes the abuser.
Wow.
And so
That's
that's what
crazy.
happened in America when Roger Williams, he was a man of destiny. He said that's wrong, you know? And by his singular influence, America has now enjoyed the legacy of religious liberty that we have today. And I think that extended to Korea as well,
That's
with
true.
Um, I think that was heavily Protestant missionary influence in Korea, and of course, the American presence during the Korean War and post-Korean War. One thing that Korea has had, and I think connects to its prosperity, is that it always has religious liberty
Wow.
in the Republic era, post Joseon Dynasty era. So that's my assessment.
So are you familiar with Korean history also?
A little bit. I'm getting a little bit more familiar. A little bit more.
From my personal experience, I've noticed that history teachers can be very like super passionate about historical facts, and not all the facts are positive. And I noticed some of them can be super like bitter, especially against Japan, especially against people that weren't good. So, did you notice that pattern from your own history teachers and professors, or do you see the history making you becoming bitter? Or so, what's your how did history shape you into a person that you are today?
There is a danger of being cynical with history. There is a danger. And one thing that history has taught me is the power of evil human nature.
Mm,
And I respect evil human nature very greatly
mm,
because all of us have the potential to do bad things.
wow.
But as a Christian and a believer in God, God can put that in check. So that gives me the hope in the midst of the cynicism.
Mm, wow.
And so it convinces me that, yeah, human nature is pretty bad. But God has also implanted each and every one of us the potential to do something very good.
Mm,
Each of us have a seed that image or that imprint of doing some wonderful positive things in the midst of our ugliness and brokenness.
mm. So, how long have you been teaching as a history teacher?
So my current assignment since 2014, 2015.
Oh wow,
I've gone on 8 years, maybe.
wow.
My math is terrible.
So how was your first year, and then how has it been going?
It has its ups and downs. With the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic and students transitioning out of distance learning, there's been some challenges, and just learning to when you get older, it's hard to adapt and be more flexible. So it's yeah, it's one of the things that I'm trying to learn, and you're always learning,
Yeah.
always learning.
Yeah, I remember teaching in my first year. They gave me all the lower level kids, and I had a hard time relating to them because I was always a student studying all the time, and then all of a sudden I had these kids that had attitudes, and wow, it was so stressful. And then that experience really helped me become a better teacher for many of the kids that are really struggling. So, is there something that you're doing better than your first year teacher self?
Uh, I think I'm more or less naive. So yeah, I mean, through experience, you get to find your place, your slot in the ecosystem of education, and more secure who you are, and still growing.
Mm, I see. Wow. So, do you remember any episode, if you can share anonymously, where students were gaining hope and wisdom from history that you were teaching? Um,
Um, yeah, I'm just trying to think of I know I befriended students that you know like for example, my history teacher really helped me in my difficult time, and I remember there was a student that was not coming to school for a while, and I tracked him down, and I met him for dinner, and I talked to him, and he confided in me why he's not coming to school, and it was he had some personal issues with certain students, and it was similar to what I went through, and so you know bad experiences in the past can do two things. They could lead you to cause other people to share in your pain, or you could use that painful experience to empathize with them and point them to a better direction. And so I was thankful to be in that position to share my painful experience that I survived that, I overcame that, to give that sense of hope. And yeah, right now, I think he graduated University of California, San Diego. So I think he's doing okay. Yeah.
Awesome. So you earlier mentioned that you got bullied for being different, and then how do you feel about the bullying in school, and how do you deal with bullies and the victims in schools? How, what kind of emotions go through your mind when you witness the same thing happening to the students
Yeah,
in
I mean, I
class?
became a bully in high school too, because
Okay, okay.
and the thing was is that I was, I became my height. I don't know Korean centimeters, but in American height, I was 6'3" since eighth grade when I was 14, and I stopped growing.
Are
So
you
I was,
super tall?
I was big and tall, and so you know, and I always had a loud voice. Uh, so yeah. As far so I went through both sides, and as far as bullying goes here in school, there's not as much bullying in my school, which is the culture is not bullying, which I think is very, I enjoy it and it's very fascinating.
That's awesome.
I have to tip the hat to probably the elementary school teachers in my institution because our school is from kindergarten all the way to senior in high school, and so the kids that go through the grade school, I'm sure the grade school teachers inculcate good morals and I tip my hat to those teachers that teach grade school. That's a totally different animal. I can do that, but yeah, there's not really that much bullying here, like overt bullying. Now, is there certain behind the scenes? Most likely, yes, but I haven't picked up on it as much blatantly in in everyday life in school where I work.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think I've been also kind of in both sides. I've been bullied because I was short, but I also bullied other people. And then I just remember being super evil, and then I regret doing it. I was very cruel, saying mean things
Yeah.
to certain kids.
One thing is that I got in touch with, reconnected with people on Facebook. Um, some students, some of my people I went to school with that I bullied, and I made it my point to apologize to them. Um, I'm fortunate. I praise God that I have an opportunity to apologize to these people that were hurt. Because those scars you carry with you, even though it's in high school and a long time ago. I recognize that, and so I'm just glad that I have an opportunity to reconcile with at least two people that I had conflict with. So
Wow, that's
uh,
so beautiful because reconciliation is not a thing, especially in history. They usually just keep bullying other nations, keep invading other nations, and then
exactly.
when you get stronger, you just suppress other nations. Um, so I make sure I have my students like say sorry, I forgive you. That just solved the problem, like on the spot.
Yeah.
So in that context, you know how Japan refuses to apologize for what they have done against Korea, and Korea wants apology. So what would be your take on that conflict, that tension as a history teacher? Uh,
You're gonna put me on the spot, huh? So my understanding is this: there have been, correct me if I'm wrong, there have been former Japanese prime ministers that have apologized,
uh-huh.
depending on who's in power.
Uh-huh.
But if the conservative party's in power,
Yeah.
they're really like staunch about their nationalism and
Yeah.
they visit their Shinto shrines with all
Yeah.
the people that have done so much hurt, not only to Korea, but to a lot of Asia,
Yeah.
Philippines and Southeast Asia and so on and so forth. Um, my hope, you know, my hope is, I can't force it, but it'd be nice if Japan would take Germany's approach. And I mean, in Germany, they don't hide the fact that the Holocaust happened. They admit they're wrong and they embrace their culpability and their means to make amends. And so I just hope that, that I think Germany is a good model in doing that. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I was also thinking in the same line. Like younger generations have no idea what happened. I think if young people can make friends with each other more, I think we can
Yeah.
kind of get over this issue and also this mindset that you don't want to apologize for anything that you have done, because you want to be great. You don't want to humble yourself. So I think that's the national spirit they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's not easy to get that thing resolved.
And there's a bit of that bitterness legacy in Korea as well. And I think we may want to be proactive forgivers.
Yeah,
Maybe that'll melt the heart on the other side. You know what you
that's
know?
true. Like Chanduan's grandson.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
They shocked
yeah,
everybody.
yeah, yeah. So it's a hard situation. I understand. Hey, my grandparents survived the occupation. They told me stories,
Wow.
so I'm very cognizant of that.
Wow.
And my grandma told me how they were forced to learn Japanese during the colonial era,
Wow.
and so I've heard. I mean, I've heard from people that experienced it. So I'm cognizant of that.
Mm.
And I remember when I was even in grade school when I visited Korea because I had a lot of family in Korea. And in junior high school, in my summer vacations when I visited, um, we would go to that Korean Independence Hall area. I don't think it's in Seoul, but it's an Independence Hall. I think it's outside of Seoul. It's a few hours away. Um, and they had dioramas of all all the torturing that the Japanese did to Korean independence activists and whatnot, and
Oh, like
seeing.
Sondaemun maybe? I've never been there.
No, that's not. It's somewhere outside. It's
Outside.
outside of Seoul.
Okay.
It's an independent. I've been to Sundowman as well. Actually, my great grandfather was in prison there.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, he
Wow.
was an Adventist pastor, and he was in prison there for 6 months, or I think a year. Yeah,
Really?
yeah. He was in prison there in the 1940s.
What did you go through?
Um, According to an article that was written by a Samyuk University lay historian, he became like a Joseph in prison.
Oh, really?
So he like preached to young people, and people got converted. It was incredible, and this is like,
Wow.
wow, this is my great grandfather. And a picture of him is in Suddamoon. There's all this room with all the mugshots, and I found his pic. My mom and I found his picture there, and so yeah,
Wow.
he was in prison in Suddamoon prison in the 1940s for a year, and
Wow. That's really fantastic that he was
and the
able to.
reason he went to prison was I'll do it quickly.
Uh huh.
Quick story is that
Yeah.
he was doing a revival meeting, and they went one day over. And at that time, you
Ah.
need permission from the Japanese government to have
Wow.
meetings.
I see.
And um, so there were Koreans that sided with the Japanese government, or infiltrators that were saying that this meeting was a front for the independence movement to overthrow Japan, which it
Ah.
wasn't.
Ah. Okay.
Yeah, it was focusing on the second coming of Jesus. That was the whole point of the meeting.
Yeah.
And so the Japanese authorities um, they were seeking to imprison the whole church.
Oh.
And, and my great grandfather cut a deal where it says, I'm the pastor, I'm responsible, save my congregation, I'll be in prison. And that's what happened. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. How did he get out?
They just let him out after a year. I don't know the exact details, but then it was like the twilight of World War II, where Japan was losing, and they
Mm.
would end up losing anyway.
Oh, I
And so,
see. Wow.
but I'll also say this: at that same time, Japanese pastors of the same denomination were also being persecuted in Japan.
Oh.
In fact, I've learned some Japanese church history, and one of the Japanese pastors straight up said to like the Japanese authorities, "You're going to lose the war
Huh?
because the Bible says that you're not going to be a world power." Point of
Ah.
Daniel 2. and he was in prison. He was beaten,
Oh,
and
really?
so no matter what nationality you are, if you stand for God, we are all bounded by our sufferings for standing up for Jesus. So,
Wow, that's crazy.
yeah.
It's so amazing how you came from the family and you're continuing the legacy. Um,
Trying, trying.
I
We'll see.
I noticed that you were doing a like podcast and YouTube channel. What led you launch into that project? And then how has it been doing that as a history teacher?
So I started a YouTube channel called Docu Devotionals, which it's like 10-minute little mini documentaries with a gospel object lesson that inspires people through historical episodes. Um, I recognize that social media is important to reach this generation. And so a couple of my speaker friends got into it before I did, and I saw what they were doing. And I'm like, like when your friends do it, you kind of get influenced and you want to do it. And so I threw my hat in the ring, and it's been a challenge. Uh, it's been some setbacks. I've learned a lot. But the good thing about YouTube is you get to learn a new skill, and so I knew nothing about camera work or anything like that before I started. And through trial and error and by watching tutorials, it's really helped me learn a new skill, and I enjoy it. Getting subscribers is difficult, uh, but because there's so much options out there. But I enjoy producing the content, and I hope that it's inspiring and a blessing to those that watch it.
Awesome. So when you work with school administrators, do you see a challenge in uh, being able to execute your educational philosophy, uh, or do you see them like having your back and supporting you and everything? Like, what do you see in your school system?
Our education alignment is pretty consistent, which is good, and so we get encouraged a lot, which is good. Yeah.
Mm, that's awesome. So, what's your plan as a history teacher?
Plan for the
Yeah,
future?
for the future. Yeah.
Oh, I just take it 1 year at a time. 1 year at a time. Um,
Okay.
I do get afraid though that I'll come to a point where I'm not as relatable to my students anymore,
Yeah.
and so I'm cognizant of that. But 1 year at a time. Yeah.
I see. And last question would be, how has your family perceived your occupation, and they expected you to be a lawyer and all this, and so how has have they been processing?
Well, that's a good question because when I dropped out of law school, I was kind of in limbo, and I actually was a intern at a major music record label in America in Burbank, a
What did,
worldwide known.
what did you say? What? You have
I,
you're a singer?
I was an intern.
Oh,
Intern. I
intern.
was
Okay.
Yeah. I have no musical talent. I was
Okay.
an intern. So I was like in the promotional department.
Okay.
So like I know Korea has like SM Entertainment, YG Entertainment. I was working for a company called Universal Record Group uh,
Um.
as an intern.
Okay.
As it basically a unpaid volunteer hoping to get a bigger job. And, um, and I was there for a while. And my dad said, hey, why don't you go into teaching? You like history. And I'm like, you know what? I do like history. And so my dad was a major influence in me going to education. And so that's how I became a teacher.
Wow.
So, I'm thankful for my dad in that. I'm thankful for my dad in many ways. Of course, my dad is my dad and he's provided for me and he's supported me. But that's like one of the, those highlights where, your dad comes through for you. Yeah.
Oh. It's great that you have a dad as a supporter because my dad passed away in 2001, 2000, 2002. So it's been a while. So you have
Yeah,
the support. So that's
yeah,
really encouraging.
yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time that you made for this interview. It was really
Thank you for
insightful.
having me.
I wasn't sure about how it would be like to teach history in America, and I learned a lot from you.
Yeah, it's just teaching. Point A happened because of point B and point C. It's just cause and effect, and that's basically what it is.
I see.
And apply that for the future, so you don't make the same mistakes as the people in the past. So
That's true.
trying to teach lessons, life lessons through it.
Yeah, I'm reading through the book of like First Kings and Second Kings, and I get
Those are good
especially
books.
I especially get emotional about what Solomon have done. I don't even know
Yes,
why he's called the wisest man in history. I think he was
you did a lot of not so wise
yeah,
things.
he was the dumbest guy in many ways because he already married an Egyptian princess,
That's right.
and after that he's like, okay, I need wisdom. Can you give it to me? I want to know what is right and wrong, and then it's just to me it's just hypocritical. So I
But
get
if you read the book of Ecclesiastes,
yeah,
it just all comes together that through his
yeah,
bitterness, he learned those lessons.
that's true.
And oftentimes, God teaches us wisdom through our brokenness, and
True.
and
Yeah, I think
that's not
yeah,
the preferred route. He wants us to learn from the mistakes of others,
yeah.
but
I
now he
think
leaves a legacy.
I think many parts of the histories are all about how kings have gained power, how they have lost it. So I think that too much power, too much influence, too much fame can be too difficult for anybody to fit themselves
Yeah.
into. So that's where everybody is driven to, but that's where everybody just come out broken. So
Yeah. I just want to say one thing in closing.
sure.
There were two things that I said I would never be when I graduated high school. I would never be a teacher, and I would never be a public speaker
Wow.
for speaking for churches. I would
Yeah.
never do those two things, and I became those two things. Um, so the lesson is sometimes God gives you what you need and not what you want,
That's true.
and what you need becomes what you want in the future. And so I just want to leave with that thought.
That's true. Not everything that we don't want may not be necessarily that we actually need.
Yeah,
You don't even recognize.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really enjoyed this interview, and I look forward to talking to you next time.
Thank you so much. It's a blessing, and have a blessed day in beautiful South Korea.
Yeah, you too.
All right,
Have a good evening.
all right. You too.
Bye bye.
All right. Take care.